For months, these 3 notes shaped almost every conversation about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. People did not treat them like rumors. They did not treat them like tips that needed verification. They treated them like messages from the people who knew exactly what had happened to her. One demanded millions in cryptocurrency. Another claimed Nancy had already died and had been buried somewhere in the natural terrain of southern Arizona. Every new message sent investigators, journalists, and thousands of people following this case back to the same question: what is this telling us about Nancy? This week, the FBI said something that changes all of it. According to News Nation's Jesse Weber, federal investigators now believe all 3 notes were fake. Not misleading, not partially true. Fake. Take a moment with that. For months, one of the most visible pieces of this investigation may not have been evidence at all. It may have been someone deliberately inserting themselves into one of the most closely watched missing person cases in the country. And that creates a question I cannot stop thinking about. If these notes did not come from the people responsible for what happened to Nancy, who wanted everyone to believe they did, because whoever wrote them did not just send letters, they changed the direction of this investigation. They made a family carry words that may not have been true. And for 5 months, millions of people, myself included, accepted that what was written in those notes reflected what had actually happened. That is what this video is investigating. Not just what the notes said, but who wanted them believed, and what that tells us about where this case actually is. My first Nancy Guthrie video asked one question: if she was already dead when the second note was sent, why did they send it at all? That question was built on the premise that the notes came from the actual kidnappers. If the FBI is right, that premise was wrong, and intellectual honesty requires me to say that directly. But here is what does not change. Someone sent those notes. Someone had information about the crime scene. And the question of who that person is, and what they know, may be more important now than it was before. If you watched my first Nancy Guthrie video, does this development change how you read what I presented? And if you are new to this case, tell me in the comments. This community is going to work through this together, but before we can understand what the fake designation actually means, we need to separate what the notes told us from what the physical evidence established independently, because those are not the same thing, and right now only one of them is still standing. Before we get into what the notes mean, let me establish what we know that has nothing to do with them. January 31st into February 1st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson. A masked intruder was captured on the doorbell surveillance camera. Blood was found outside the property. Nancy, 84 years old, in good health, was not there when her daughter went looking for her. That is what the physical evidence establishes, independent of every note. Nancy was taken from her home by someone who had premeditated it. The blood and the surveillance footage established that, not the notes. Everything the notes added, about the ransom, about her death, about the burial location, sits on top of that documented foundation, and everything the notes added is now in question. But to understand what the FBI statement actually means, you need to understand why every source believed the notes were real in the first place. And inside that explanation there is one detail, a specific detail buried in the first note, that I need to introduce before we go further. Because once you see the CBS FBI contradiction, that detail is the thing that blows the entire fake designation open. The first note arrived around February 5th, 4 days after Nancy disappeared, sent to TMZ and to a local Tucson television station. It opened, "Hello Savannah, we have your mother Nancy." It demanded millions in Bitcoin. It said Nancy was safe but scared. TMZ's Harvey Levin confirmed the note also included, "Pay or the price goes up and we kill her." And it referenced the location of Nancy's Apple Watch in her bedroom. Specifically, where it was charging. That detail was why CBS News sourced to investigators said the notes almost certainly came from the actual person or persons who abducted Nancy. A random opportunist does not know where an 84-year-old woman's Apple Watch is charging in her bedroom. The second note arrived February 6th. No demand. 3 sentences. She perished shortly after she was taken. She is buried in nature now. And, according to AZ family who received it directly, we are truly sorry. Same IP address, same technical infrastructure, Both notes came from the same source. Every analyst, every investigator quoted publicly, every outlet. They all pointed to the same conclusion: these notes came from someone who was there. Savannah Guthrie herself said, "I tend to believe those are real. The FBI now says they are not. And somebody deliberately inserted themselves into one of America's biggest missing person investigations, using crime scene details that only a tiny number of people could have known. That is not a hoax. That is an act that either assisted the kidnapper, obstructed investigators, or both." Hold the Apple Watch. Because once you see what CBS and the FBI appear to be saying simultaneously, that detail is the thing that refuses to let the fake designation lie flat. I want to sit with this institutional contradiction because I think it is the most important thing in this entire week. On June 22nd, CBS News published a report sourced to investigators confirming that the notes almost certainly came from the actual person or persons who abducted Nancy. Now the FBI, per News Nation's Jesse Weber, says all three notes are fake, not from genuine kidnappers. These are both credible institutions. And there are several possibilities for why they appear to be saying opposite things. First, investigators who spoke to CBS and investigators who spoke to Jesse Weber may represent different factions within the investigation with different assessments. Second, CBS's authentic and the FBI's fake might refer to different standards. Authentic meaning contains real insider knowledge. Fake meaning not from the person who physically entered the house. Third, the investigation evolved. CBS spoke to investigators before the FBI's full analysis was complete. Fourth, one of these institutional sources got it wrong. I am not in a position to resolve which of those is true right now, and I do not think any channel that tells you with certainty which is correct is being straight with you. CBS said authentic from the actual abductors. FBI now says fake. Which source do you believe, and which explanation for the contradiction makes the most sense to you? I genuinely go back and forth. Tell me where you land. But the contradiction between CBS and the FBI is not even the hardest question this development creates. The hardest question is the one I asked you to hold. The Apple Watch. Before we get there, there is one person in this story whose role is not in question. Derek Kella is a 42-year-old man from Hawthorne, California. On February 4th, 3 days after Nancy disappeared, he used a fake number app, researched the family's phone numbers from public records, and sent 2 text messages directly to Nancy Guthrie and her husband. "Did you get the Bitcoin? We are waiting on our end for the transaction." He admitted it to FBI agents without a lawyer. This week, Derek Kella is scheduled to change his plea to guilty. Here is the critical distinction. Kella sent texts to the family. He did not send the notes to the media. He inserted himself separately into an already existing situation. If the FBI now says all 3 notes are fake, Kella's texts were always known to be fake. The question is what the FBI's statement means for the 2 notes he had nothing to do with. Kella said he sent the texts because he wanted to see how the family would react. Does that explanation make sense to you? Or does it raise more questions? Kella's plea change happening in the same week the FBI calls the notes fake is something we will come back to. But first, the Apple Watch. Finally, this is the most consequential development in the Nancy Guthrie case since the second note went public. When more information comes through, we go through it together. Subscribe so you are here. I asked you to hold the Apple Watch. Here is why it matters. The first note did not just say we have Nancy, it referenced the location of her Apple Watch, in her bedroom, where it was charging. CBS News confirmed this detail was in the note. Multiple analysts cited it as proof of inside knowledge. Not someone who read news coverage, someone who was there, or someone who was told by someone who was there. A random opportunist in California does not know where Nancy Guthrie's Apple Watch is in her bedroom. That level of specificity requires one of 3 things: physical access to the crime scene, a direct connection to someone who had access, or that detail being publicly available through a source nobody has identified. Now the FBI says the note is fake. Those 2 things cannot both be true without a third fact connecting them. The notes were supposed to be the investigation's clearest window into who took Nancy. The FBI just said that window was never real, but the Apple Watch detail is still on the other side of it, and someone put it there. A fake note from someone who does not know where the Apple Watch is means one thing. A fake note from someone who does know where it is means something completely different. There are only two honest explanations for a fake note with a real crime scene detail. Either the faker got that detail from someone connected to the crime, or it was somehow guessable. Which explanation do you accept? Because I do not think both can be true at once. And that question, how a fake note contains a real crime scene detail, is what forces us to interrogate what the FBI's word fake is actually doing. I want to propose that the FBI's word, fake, deserves careful interrogation. Not because I think the FBI is lying, because fake has at least three distinct meanings here. Definition 1. Random hoax. Someone with no connection to the crime fabricated a note. This is what Kella did with his texts. The Apple Watch detail was guessed, wrong, or accessible in a way nobody has explained. Definition 2. Connected fake. Someone who knew the actual kidnapper, a family member, associate, accomplice, wrote the notes independently, using information the kidnapper shared. The notes are technically fake, not from the kidnapper. But the author was connected. Definition 3. Strategic fake. Someone directly involved used intermediaries to create distance. Fake means the notes cannot be traced to the person who entered the house, but the author is still connected. Definition 2 is the most forensically significant, because it would mean the note sender is the closest publicly communicating person connected to this crime in the entire case. Not the kidnapper, but someone close enough to know what was in Nancy's bedroom. Which definition of fake fits the available evidence best? Because the answer changes everything about what investigators should be doing right now. But whatever fake means technically, there is a consequence to this revelation that goes beyond the investigation. Because these notes did not just affect the evidence, they affected people. If you have followed this case from the first note, you understand that every week brings something that changes the frame. This week might be the biggest frame change yet. When the next development comes, Crime Deepcut goes through every piece of it. Subscribe. This investigation is not finished. I want to sit with something I have not seen fully addressed anywhere in this week's coverage. These notes did not just affect the investigation. They shaped how an entire family understood what had happened to their mother. They shaped how investigators allocated 5 months of resources and attention. They shaped how journalists framed thousands of articles. And they shaped how millions of people following this case understood what they were looking at, myself included. For 5 months, Savannah Guthrie has been carrying the weight of a note that told her mother was dead and buried. On February 7th, the day after the second note arrived, she posted, "We received your message and we understand." She understood. She has been sitting in front of cameras at the Today Show every morning since then, carrying those words. On February 24th, she offered $1 million in reward money, fighting back tears, knowing what she knew. And now the FBI says the person who wrote those words may not have been there, may not have witnessed her mother's death, may not know where she is buried. That is not relief. That is a different kind of devastation. Because the note, as terrible as it was an answer, and now the answer has been taken away. What is left is not hope, it is uncertainty, which may be worse. Part of me understands exactly why investigators kept the note's contents restricted for as long as they did. The forensic markers, the exact phrasing, the details only the sender would know. If you release what you have, you burn the tool that lets you test suspects against it. That argument is real and I do not dismiss it. But another part of me cannot stop thinking about everyone those notes touched. The family sitting with an answer that may not have been true. The investigators who built months of work around a document that may not reflect reality. The volunteers who searched terrain they would not have searched without it. The millions of people who accepted 3 sentences as the most honest account of what had happened. Someone manufactured that. Whether for money, for attention, or for reasons that have not been made public, they inserted deliberate grief into an investigation that was already carrying enough of the real kind. Tell me what troubles you more, that someone wrote those notes, or that so many institutions and people believed them for 5 months. Because I think your answer reveals something real about how we process information in cases like this one. I have to address something directly, because I know it is the question every person following this case is sitting with right now. If the note that said she perished shortly after she was taken is fake, Does that mean Nancy might still be alive? Here's what I can say honestly. The primary documented evidence for Nancy's death has always been that note. The physical evidence, the blood, the surveillance footage, the abduction itself, establishes that she was taken. It does not independently establish what happened next. If the note is fake, if it was written by someone who did not witness her death, then we have lost the primary evidentiary basis for the conclusion that she died. That does not mean she is alive. The blood outside her home, the violence implied by a masked intruder's entry at 2 in the morning, the fact that she is 84 years old and has been missing for 5 months. These facts paint a picture that is not hopeful. But the honest investigative position is this. As of the FBI's statement, the documented evidence that Nancy is dead has become weaker, and a reward of over $1.2 million is still unclaimed. I am not going to tell you she is probably alive. I do not believe that based on the totality of the evidence. I am going to tell you that the person who sent those notes, fake or not, may know where she is, and that person is still out there. Does the FBI's announcement change your honest assessment of whether Nancy is still alive? Tell me. Because I think this is the question everyone following this case is sitting with right now. Derek Kella is changing his plea to guilty on July 2nd. The FBI is announcing this week that all 3 notes are fake. In the same week. Federal plea changes do not happen in a vacuum. There are 2 clean explanations. First, they are coincidental. Kella's legal timeline ran its natural course. The FBI concluded its analysis independently. Second, they are connected. Kella's cooperation, his plea change, may have provided information that informed the FBI's conclusion about the notes. If Kella, during negotiations, confirmed what was publicly available versus what was not, that could have helped the FBI reach the fake designation. Kella's plea change and the FBI calling the notes fake, same week. Coincidence or coordination? Tell me what you think the timing means. The timing is one question. What the investigation focuses on next is a much larger one. Retired Detective Chris McDana spent 7 days in Tucson investigating this case personally. He raised a point that has stayed with me. The backpack the surveillance suspect carried, an Ozark Trail 25-liter, is a Walmart product. There are 3 Walmart stores within 2 miles of Annie Guthrie's workshop. The clothing, the mask, the equipment, almost certainly from Walmart. McDana asked whether the informant networks near Annie's workshop have been systematically asked about this crime. His answer, no, not systematically. After 5 months, the street intelligence strategy that could name the person in the surveillance footage has not been fully coordinated. That is not a failure. It is a gap. And gaps can be closed. DNA is still at Quantico. The blockchain trace on the Bitcoin address is running. The linguistic analysis of the notes, which now matters in a different way, with a different question attached to it, is still active. If you were running this investigation right now, given what the FBI just said, where would you focus? The forensic evidence? The street intelligence? The note sender? Something else? But there is one thread in this investigation that the fake designation does not diminish. It actually strengthens it. Let me tell you what I think the FBI's announcement actually means for the investigation. Not what it takes away, what it adds. If the notes are fake from someone with no connection to the crime, the investigation has lost an evidentiary thread and gained nothing. But if the notes are fake from someone connected to the kidnapper, which is the only explanation consistent with the Apple Watch detail, then the investigation has just identified something extraordinary. The fake note sender, if connected, is the closest publicly communicating person to the actual abductor in this entire case, not the kidnapper. A person who knows the kidnapper, who is trusted enough to receive crime scene details, who used Bitcoin infrastructure, who chose the word perished, who said buried in nature. That person is a witness, potentially the most valuable witness the investigation may have. And the FBI's public designation of the notes as fake, if it is strategic, may be specifically designed to communicate something to that person. We know you are not the kidnapper. We know you were connected. We know you have information. There is $1.2 million waiting for what you know. If the fake note sender is connected to the actual kidnapper, what do you think it would take for them to come forward? Money? Immunity? The weight of what they are carrying? That question, who wanted everyone to believe they were reading a kidnapper's own words, and why, is not answered by the FBI's announcement. It is the investigation the FBI's announcement opens. When the FBI releases more detail on what fake means, Crime Deepcut goes through all of it. Subscribe. On June 22nd, Savannah Guthrie appeared on the Today Show. She said, "We are in agony, and we cannot be in peace." She begged, "Please do the right thing." She also said, "I tend to believe those are real," referring to the notes. The FBI now says they are not. Nancy Guthrie attended Mass every Sunday morning. She was first reported missing because she did not show up for a church live stream with the friends who loved her. She walked through her front door on the night of January 31st and never came back. Her daughter has been carrying the weight of a note that said her mother was dead and buried for 5 months, and now she has been told that note may have come from someone who was never there. That is where this family is right now, not closer to an answer. Further from one. 5 questions, 3 predictions, real answers, in the comments. 1. CBS source to investigators said the notes were likely from the actual abductors. The FBI now says all 3 are fake. You cannot hold both as fully true simultaneously. Which institution do you trust more on this specific question, and why? 2. If the first note is fake but contained the specific location of Nancy's Apple Watch in her bedroom, what is the only explanation that makes forensic sense to you? The detail was guessable? The faker had a direct connection to the kidnapper? Something else? 3. The note that said she perished shortly after she was taken is now called fake. Does that change your honest assessment of whether Nancy Guthrie might still be alive? 4. Derek Kella changing his plea and the FBI announcing the notes are fake, same week. Related or coincidence? 5. If you knew you had information that could lead to Nancy Guthrie being found, and there was $1.2 million in reward money unclaimed, what would stop you from calling 1-800-CALL-FBI? And the 3 predictions I want on the record before this case moves again. 6. Do you think investigators already know who sent the notes? And is the note sender the thread that leads to an arrest? 7. Do you think Nancy will be found before an arrest is made, or does the arrest come first? 8. Do you think this ends with a conviction? And does the note, "We are truly sorry, we never intended to hurt her," actually help whoever sent it in court? Whoever wrote those notes is still out there, and they know what the actual answers are. The FBI's announcement did not close this investigation. It started a different one. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She walked through her front door on the night of January 31st and did not come back. The notes were supposed to tell us what happened to Nancy. The FBI says they cannot tell us that anymore. But someone wrote them. Someone knew things they should not have known. Someone used the word perished and wrote buried in nature and said, "We are truly sorry." That person, whoever they are, is still the closest thing this investigation has to a witness who has spoken publicly. And the question of who wanted everyone to believe they were reading a kidnapper's own words is now one of the most consequential open questions in this entire case. The fake note designation did not close what we knew about Nancy. It opened a different investigation entirely. When the FBI explains what fake actually means, when Derek Kella's plea produces anything of consequence, when this investigation moves, Crime Deepcut will be here. If you have any information about what happened to Nancy Guthrie, please call 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit tips.fbi.gov. The reward is $1.2 million. You can be completely anonymous. Crime Deepcut stays on this case.